I didn't realize I was being erased. Not at first. There were no arguments, no slammed doors, no raised voices, just quiet decisions being made without me. By the time I noticed, people had already started speaking for me, explaining my feelings, my limits, my future, as if I were no longer capable of doing it myself. My daughter would smile and say, "She's doing great. She's resting. She doesn't need to worry about these things anymore." And everyone believed her because she sounded calm, responsible, loving, and I sounded emotional. That's how it works, isn't it? The person who controls the tone controls the story. I remember the exact moment something inside me shifted. I was sitting quietly, listening to my own name being used like a formality, not a person, when it hit me. My life had already been reorganized. I just hadn't been informed yet. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I was too tired, too polite, too old to push back. They assumed I would accept it quietly, the way women like me are expected to. But silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it means someone is paying very close attention. I didn't fight them right away. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't defend myself. I let them relax. I let them believe they were in control. Because the moment people think they've already won, they stop being careful. This isn't a story about shouting. It's a story about what happens when dignity is taken and slowly, deliberately reclaimed. It's about trust that was misplaced and strength that was underestimated. And it all began long before anyone realized there was a problem. Before the papers, before the humiliation, before I understood what my own family was capable of. It started with something small, something I almost ignored. Back then, I still believed love meant protection, and that belief changed everything. Before I tell you how it ended, you need to understand how it began. People think humiliation is loud. They imagine screaming, crying, someone storming out. But the worst kind? The worst kind is quiet. It happens in rooms full of people who pretend not to notice while your dignity is peeled away piece by piece. That's how it started for me, on a Sunday afternoon. In a church I had attended for over 30 years. I stood there in my good coat, the blue one I only wore on special occasions, holding a small envelope in my hands, while my family sat behind me pretending not to know me. The pastor cleared his throat, and that's when my daughter did it. She laughed. Not loud, just loud enough. I didn't always used to be invisible. Once, I was the woman everyone asked for advice. Once, people leaned in when I spoke. Once, my home was where holidays happened, where stories were told, where everyone felt safe. But time does something strange to women like me. We give. And give. And give. Until one day, people forget we ever had anything left to lose. My name is Margaret Hale. I was married for 42 years. I raised 3 children. I sacrificed a career I loved because someone had to stay behind when life got complicated. And on that Sunday afternoon, my own family decided to remind me, publicly, exactly where I stood. Nowhere. The humiliation didn't come as an insult. It came disguised as tradition, as procedure, as something everyone had agreed on. That's how they get away with it. The pastor smiled gently and said my daughter's name. Rebecca will be handling the family announcement. I felt my stomach tighten. Rebecca stood up smoothly, confident, dressed perfectly for attention. She didn't look at me. She never did anymore. She turned toward the congregation and cleared her throat. "We just wanted to let everyone know," she said, smiling, "that my mother will no longer be managing family matters." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Rebecca continued, "It's time for her to rest. She's done enough." The words sounded kind. They weren't. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. She wasn't done speaking. "We've made arrangements," Rebecca added, "to make sure things move forward properly." Then she laughed. That small laugh. The one that said this is already decided. People smiled politely. No one looked at me. And I stood there, a woman who had built that family, feeling like an inconvenience that had overstayed its welcome. That's when my son-in-law leaned toward someone and whispered something. I didn't hear the words, I heard the tone. Amused. Dismissive. Like I was already gone. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I smiled. Because sometimes survival looks like silence. And silence? Silence gives you time. What they didn't know, what none of them could see, was that the humiliation didn't break me. It clarified me. Because when someone humiliates you in public, they do something dangerous. They show you exactly who they are and exactly how far they're willing to go. I went home alone that afternoon, sat at my kitchen table, the same table I'd cooked thousands of meals at, the same table where birthdays happened. And I realized something slowly, painfully, clearly. They didn't want me quiet. They wanted me gone. I folded my coat carefully, placed the envelope on the table, and for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I should have asked a long time ago. What happens if I stop protecting them? That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was sad, but because something had finally woken up. And once it wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. I didn't go back to church the next Sunday, not because I was ashamed, because I didn't trust myself not to say something that would make it worse. There's a time for truth. And there's a time for observation. That week, I observed. I watched how quickly my phone stopped ringing, how invitations dried up without explanation, how people who once needed me suddenly seemed busy. Rebecca had always been good at that, quietly rewriting the story before anyone noticed. The letter arrived on Wednesday, not hand-delivered, not discussed, mailed, like a utility bill. I stood at the counter, staring at the envelope before opening it, already knowing what it was. Legal paper has a weight to it, even before you read the words. Inside was a neatly typed document titled Family Care Transition Agreement. My name appeared 6 times. None of those times were in my handwriting. I sat down slowly. Read it once, then again. Each sentence felt colder than the last. According to the document, I had voluntarily stepped down from all family responsibilities. Financial oversight, property decisions, medical authority, everything. They'd even included a section about declining cognitive reliability. That part made my hands shake. Declining. Like I was already halfway gone. At the bottom was a signature. Mine. Or something that looked like it. I laughed then. A short, sharp sound that surprised me. Because I knew exactly when that signature had been taken. 3 months earlier. A routine meeting. Rebecca had said, "It's just paperwork, Mom. For emergencies." I hadn't been wearing my glasses. I trusted her. That was the moment I understood. This hadn't started at church. Church was just the reveal. This had been happening quietly, systematically, for a long time. I drove to Rebecca's house that afternoon. Not angry, focused. She answered the door with the same calm smile she always wore when she thought she was in control. "Hi, Mom," she said lightly. "Everything okay?" I held up the document. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. You want to explain this? I asked. She sighed like I was inconveniencing her. It's for your own good, she said. We talked about this. No, I replied. You talked. I listened. She stepped aside to let me in. Her house smelled like money. Clean, cold, unlived in. We're worried about you, she continued. You forget things. You get emotional. I laughed again. You're wearing my wedding bracelet, I said suddenly. She froze. Her wrist moved instinctively. That was a gift, she snapped. Yes, I said softly. From me. Silence settled between us. Did you plan this? I asked. She didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. You embarrassed me at church, I continued. Why? She crossed her arms. Because you wouldn't step aside quietly. There it was. The truth always slips out eventually. You were slowing things down, she added. People were starting to notice. I nodded slowly, not in agreement, in understanding. People, I repeated. Or money? Her jaw tightened. Dad would have wanted this, she said. That was the final insult. Don't speak for your father, I replied. You never listened to him when he was alive. Her face hardened. You don't have a choice anymore. I met her eyes. Yes, I said. I do. That night, I sat alone again. But this time I wasn't confused. I spread every document across the table. Bank statements, deeds, old emails. I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for patterns. And patterns have a way of telling the truth, even when people don't. That's when I noticed something small. A delay. One account that hadn't moved in years. Still under my name. Untouched. Unnoticed. Rebecca had been thorough. Just not thorough enough. I didn't sleep much that night either. But it wasn't fear this time. It was planning. Because when someone humiliates you publicly and rewrites your life privately, they make one fatal mistake. They assume you'll break. They never imagine you'll get smart. The account had been quiet for years. No withdrawals, no deposits, no attention, which, in a family like mine, made it invisible. I stared at the statement for a long time, tracing the numbers with my finger like they might disappear if I looked away. It wasn't a fortune, not compared to what Rebecca managed, but it was something far more dangerous. It was mine. Still legally mine. I'd almost forgotten why it existed. Almost. Years ago, when my husband Thomas was still alive, we'd argued about control. Not money. Control. I want something that stays mine. I told him one night, long after the kids had moved out. For what? He'd asked gently. In case I ever need to remember who I am. He hadn't argued. He'd helped me open the account. Under my name only. No joint access. No heirs listed. Just me. Thomas had called it my quiet anchor. Rebecca never knew about it. Or if she did, she dismissed it as irrelevant. That was her weakness. She only valued what looked impressive on paper. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not fancy, not frail, neutral. I wore the gray coat I'd had for years and my good walking shoes. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted competence. The law office sat between a bakery and a hardware store. Unassuming, which made me trust it more. The receptionist looked up as I entered. Yes. My name is Margaret Hale, I said evenly. I'd like to speak to someone about elder fraud. Her expression changed immediately. Not alarm. Recognition. Of course, she said. Have a seat. The lawyer was younger than I expected. Kind eyes. Careful listener. I laid everything out. The signature. The document. The church announcement. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," he said. "This was strategic," I nodded. "That's what scares me." "It should," he replied. "And it should anger you." I surprised myself by smiling. "I'm past anger," I said. "I'm interested in options." He smiled back. "Good," he said, "because you have several." Meanwhile, the silence from my family deepened. No calls, no explanations, just updates filtered through other people. Rebecca had taken full control of the family trust. My sons had gone along with it. Easier that way. Less conflict. I'd always raised them to keep the peace. Now I was paying for it. The lawyer explained things slowly. Undoing the documents would take time. But challenging the authority? That could happen quietly, strategically. "Do not confront them yet," he advised. "Let them think you've accepted it." I nodded. I'd been underestimated my whole life. I could do it a little longer. That evening, I returned home and found a box on my porch. No note. Inside were my things. Personal things. My late husband's watch. Photo albums. Documents I'd kept safe for decades. Rebecca was erasing me. One box at a time. I sat on the floor and cried then. Not because I was weak. Because grief demands to be felt before it turns poisonous. When I finished, I wiped my face and stood up. I placed the watch on my wrist. The weight of it steadied me. They thought they'd taken everything that mattered. They were wrong. They'd left me my memory, my name, and one quiet account they didn't even know to fear. That night, I opened a notebook. The old kind. Paper. Ink. I wrote one sentence on the first page. "I will not disappear politely. I did exactly what the lawyer advised." I went quiet. No calls, no visits, no objections. I let the story Rebecca was telling settle into people's minds. That I was tired. That I was confused. That I was finally resting. Silence makes people careless, especially people who believe they've already won. Rebecca moved fast after that. She always did, when she felt untouchable. Within weeks, she'd consolidated accounts, reassigned authority, and started introducing herself publicly as the one handling family matters. She used my name often, not respectfully, administratively, as my mother's representative on my mother's behalf. Every time I heard it, something cold settled deeper in my chest. But I said nothing. The first crack appeared at a neighborhood fundraiser. I hadn't planned to attend, but the lawyer suggested it. "Visibility matters," he'd said, "especially when they're trying to erase you." So I went. Not dressed for attention, just present. When Rebecca saw me, her smile froze, just for a second. Long enough. "Mom," she said loudly, approaching me, "I didn't know you were coming." "That makes two of us," I replied calmly. People nearby pretended not to listen. They always do. Rebecca touched my arm. Too firm, too familiar. "You should have told me," she said. "These events can be overwhelming for you." I looked at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. "I feel fine," I said evenly. "Do you?" A few heads turned. Nothing dramatic, just enough. Later that evening, someone asked me a simple question. "So how are you handling everything?" Rebecca jumped in before I could answer. "She stepped back," she said smoothly. "We decided it was best." I smiled. "We discussed options," I said. "Decisions are still ongoing." Rebecca's eyes flickered. Just once. That was all I needed. The next morning my lawyer called. "They've made a mistake," he said. "What kind?" I asked. "The public kind." Rebecca had filed updated authority paperwork. Rushed, in her confidence, she'd overstated her role, claimed decisions that legally required my consent. Small errors, big implications. She assumed you wouldn't challenge it, he continued. I won't, I said. Not yet. He chuckled softly. I was hoping you'd say that. The box deliveries continued. More belongings returned without explanation. Each one felt like a statement. You no longer belong. I documented everything. Photos, dates, times. Silence doesn't mean inactivity. It means preparation. One evening, my youngest son called. His voice sounded uncertain. Mom, Rebecca says you're upset. I closed my eyes. That's generous of her, I said. She says you're confused about what's happening. I breathed slowly. Are you asking me or repeating her? A pause. I guess I'm asking. I'm not confused, I said gently. I'm watching. He didn't know what to say to that. Few people do. After we hung up, I sat alone and thought about something Thomas once told me. People don't fear anger, he'd said. They fear unpredictability. Rebecca thought she knew me, thought she'd already written the ending. She had no idea I'd stopped following her script. That night, I added another line to my notebook. Let them underestimate the quiet. Rebecca loved an audience. Not in an obvious way. She preferred rooms where people already expected to listen. Board meetings, charity luncheons, community panels. Places where authority sounded polite and power hid behind good intentions. That's where she made her next mistake. She accepted an invitation to speak at a local women's leadership event. The topic? Caring for aging parents with dignity. I found out the same way everyone else did. A flyer. My name mentioned in passing. Inspired by her experience managing her mother's affairs. Managing. Like I was inventory. My lawyer advised me not to attend. I went anyway. Not to confront. To witness. The room was full of nodding heads and practiced empathy. Rebecca stood at the podium in a soft gray suit. Voice steady. Hands moving just enough to seem sincere. When the roles reverse, she said, it's important to step in before it's too late. She paused. For their safety and for ours. Something about that line made my stomach turn. People clapped. I didn't. Then she said my name. My mother, she continued, is no longer capable of handling complex decisions. It was a painful realization. The room went quiet, sympathetic, attentive. I stood up. Not dramatically, just stood. Heads turned. Rebecca's voice faltered for the first time. I'm here, I said calmly, and I'd like to speak for myself. A murmur rippled through the room. Rebecca froze. Mom, she whispered into the microphone, forcing a smile. This isn't the place. This, I said gently, is exactly the place. Silence pressed in from all sides. I've listened to my daughter speak for me for months, I continued. Today, I'd like to speak as me. I didn't accuse. I didn't defend. I stated facts. I did not step down voluntarily. I was not consulted fully. And I am not incapable. Rebecca's face flushed. People shifted uncomfortably. Truth does that. The moderator hesitated, then nodded. Go ahead, she said. I spoke slowly. About trust. About signatures taken under false pretenses. About the danger of confusing control with care. I never raised my voice. I didn't have to. By the time I finished, no one was clapping. They were thinking. Rebecca stepped away from the podium without meeting my eyes. The fallout was immediate. Emails. Calls. Questions Rebecca wasn't prepared to answer. People don't like feeling manipulated, especially when they realize they applauded the wrong story. My lawyer smiled when I told him. She crossed a line publicly, he said. That changes everything. I nodded. I didn't mean to humiliate her, I said. He raised an eyebrow. You didn't, he replied. You corrected the record. There's a difference. That night, my phone rang. Rebecca. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, then a text. You embarrassed me. I wrote back one sentence. You spoke for me one too many times. I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the fight was over, but because I'd finally entered it on my own terms. Rebecca didn't call again after that. She didn't need to. I could feel the shift without a word being spoken. Power doesn't disappear all at once. It leaks. Through hesitation, through overcorrection, through people starting to ask questions you can't answer fast enough. And Rebecca was suddenly answering a lot of questions. The first sign came from the bank. A polite email. Routine language. But the message was clear. Certain authorities are under review. Review. Such a small word. Such a dangerous one. My lawyer had warned me this would happen. Once credibility cracks publicly, he'd said, institutions start protecting themselves. I didn't celebrate, I observed. My sons began calling separately. Not together. That mattered. The oldest asked questions without finishing them. The youngest tried to sound neutral and failed. Rebecca says you're working with lawyers, he said carefully. I am, I replied. For what? For clarity. Silence. That scares her, he admitted. Good? I said softly. It should. Rebecca showed up 2 days later, unannounced. No smile. No script. She looked tired, truly tired. You blindsided me, she said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside to let her in. No, I replied. I stopped letting you speak for me. She paced my living room like it belonged to her. You don't understand the damage you're causing, she snapped. People are questioning everything. Yes, I said. That's how truth works. She stopped pacing. You could have handled this privately. I met her eyes. So could you. That landed. She tried a different angle then, softer. You know, I was just trying to help, she said. You were struggling. I nodded. I was grieving. I said, those are not the same thing. Her voice sharpened again. You're risking the family. I took a breath. No, I replied. I'm redefining it. The legal notice arrived the following week. Formal. Measured. Addressed to both of us. A request for documentation. Signatures. Explanations. Rebecca's name appeared more times than mine. That detail mattered. She read it standing in my kitchen, hands shaking slightly. They're accusing me, she said. They're asking questions. I corrected. Accusations come later. She looked up at me then. Really looked. You planned this, she said quietly. I didn't deny it. I protected myself, I said. Something you taught me to stop doing. She laughed bitterly. You taught me to be strong, she said. No, I replied. I taught you to be honest. That night, I sat alone again, but the loneliness felt different now, lighter, like the kind that comes after telling the truth out loud. I opened my notebook and read the first line again. I will not disappear politely. Then I added another. I will not apologize for surviving. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Inside, something had finally settled. Not peace, readiness. Because when someone builds their power on your silence, the moment you speak becomes inevitable and irreversible. The email arrived late at night. No subject line, no greeting, just an attachment and one sentence. You should see this before they do. It was from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, an old family accountant. Careful man, quiet man, the kind who remembered details because he'd learned what forgetting cost. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening the file. Some instincts don't fade. They wait. The document was dated 12 years earlier. A property transfer. Executed during a period Rebecca liked to describe as a difficult time for Mom. I remembered that year. Thomas had been sick. Not dying yet, just fragile. I'd been exhausted, distracted, trusting. The document showed a signature. Mine again. Or something pretending to be. My stomach tightened. Below it was a note in the accountant's handwriting, signed without independent counsel present. That detail mattered more than anything else. I sat there, breathing slowly, letting memory rearrange itself. That family dinner Rebecca insisted on hosting. The stack of papers. Her voice, calm and rushed at the same time. Just formalities, Mom. I'd signed because I was tired. Because I believed my daughter loved me. Because I never imagined she'd rehearse my erasure while handing me a pen. The next morning, my lawyer didn't speak right away when I showed him the document. He leaned back, closed his eyes. This, he said finally, changes the timeline. How? I asked. It establishes a pattern, he replied. Intent. That word echoed. Intent. Rebecca hadn't panicked recently. She'd planned early. The sons came separately that week. Not summoned. Drawn. The oldest first. He sat stiffly, hands clasped. She says you're trying to destroy her, he said. I'm correcting a lie, I replied. He hesitated. She says you signed everything. I slid the document across the table. He read slowly, then paled. I didn't know, he whispered. No, I said gently. You didn't ask. He flinched. That was enough. The youngest came 2 days later, he cried. Not loudly. Just quietly, like he'd been holding it in too long. She's always controlled the story, he said. I just went along. I handed him a tissue. I know, I said. That's how silence survives. He looked at me then. Not as a mother, as a woman. What happens now? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Now, I said finally, everyone tells the truth. Rebecca didn't. Not yet. She doubled down, filed motions, sent letters, tried to outpace consequences with confidence. That was her final miscalculation. Speed doesn't beat evidence. It only highlights desperation. The hearing was scheduled quietly. No press, no audience, just a room, a table, and the past laid out neatly in folders. Rebecca arrived early, perfectly dressed, still smiling, until she saw the accountant. Then the lawyer. Then the sons sitting on opposite sides of the room. Her smile didn't disappear. It cracked. She looked at me then. Really looked. You remember, she said softly. Yes, I replied. I just needed proof. The room went very quiet. And for the first time since all this began, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, grief. Because no victory comes without the cost of seeing someone clearly when you once saw them with love. The hearing didn't feel dramatic. No raised voices. No gasps. No moment where someone stormed out. Real consequences rarely look like movies. They look like paperwork. And silence. Rebecca's lawyer spoke first. Confident. polished, familiar. He framed everything as concern, as protection, as family acting in unity during a difficult time. He used words like intent and care and reasonable judgment. He never once looked at me. That mattered. Then my lawyer stood. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He laid out dates, signatures, patterns. He showed how authority had been transferred quietly, repeatedly, always during moments of grief or illness, always without independent counsel, always in Rebecca's favor. When he finished, he sat down without adding a single emotional word. The room stayed quiet. The accountant spoke next. He didn't accuse. He clarified. I raised concerns, he said evenly. They were dismissed. By whom? He didn't have to say. Rebecca shifted in her chair, just once, but everyone noticed. Then the judge looked at me. Mrs. Hale, she said gently, do you wish to speak? I stood slowly. My hands were steady. I don't want revenge, I said. I want restoration. I paused. Not of money, I continued. Of truth. I didn't look at Rebecca. I didn't need to. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Quietly. Efficiently. Authority revoked. Documents invalidated. Oversight reassigned. No punishment that looked like drama. Just a dismantling of control, brick by brick. Rebecca lost what she valued most. The illusion of being untouchable. She didn't call afterward. Neither did I. Some conversations don't heal. They just clarify. The sons reacted differently. The oldest sent a short message. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I believed him. The youngest came by in person. He hugged me longer than necessary. I don't know how to fix this, he said. You don't, I replied. You live differently. Life didn't suddenly become easy, but it became honest. I took back responsibility slowly, on my terms. I stopped explaining myself to people who preferred the simpler story. I learned something important. Humiliation loses its power when you refuse to internalize it. One evening, I walked past the church again, lights on, doors open. I didn't go inside. I didn't need closure from the place where I'd been humiliated. I'd already reclaimed myself elsewhere. I wrote one final line in my notebook that night. Quiet revenge isn't about winning. It's about no longer needing permission to exist. After the ruling, life didn't pause to acknowledge what had happened. The grocery store still opened at 8. The mail still arrived late. Neighbors still waved without asking questions. Justice doesn't announce itself. It just changes the way you breathe. I started receiving calls again. Not from everyone, just from the ones who mattered. Friends who'd gone quiet out of discomfort rather than disloyalty. People who didn't know where to stand until the ground stopped moving. I didn't resent them. Fear makes cowards of good people. The church sent a letter? Carefully worded, they wanted to reconnect. I folded it and set it aside. Some doors don't need reopening. They need remembering. Rebecca didn't disappear. She couldn't. Too much of her identity was tied to visibility. But she did retreat, stepped back from boards, declined invitations. She'd learned what exposure could cost. I didn't take pleasure in that. I felt sadness for the daughter I thought I was raising, for the woman she chose to become. The youngest son came by often, not to ask for guidance, just to sit. Sometimes silence is repair. The oldest sent updates, measured, careful, trying. I let him. Rebuilding trust isn't about forcing closeness. It's about allowing consistency. I redecorated the living room. Not for status, for comfort. I removed photos that made me ache and kept the ones that made me smile without flinching. Memory should warm you, not wound you. One afternoon, I found myself laughing. Out loud, alone, at nothing in particular. That surprised me more than the humiliation ever had. Because joy, after loss, feels like betrayal until you realize it isn't. It's survival. I thought about Rebecca often, not with anger, with clarity. She wasn't evil, she was afraid. Afraid of losing relevance, afraid of being seen as ordinary. She chose control over connection. That choice has consequences no court can fix. I no longer introduced myself as anyone's mother. I used my name, Margaret Hale. That was enough. Late one evening, I reread my notebook from the beginning. Every line felt earned. I added the final sentence. I didn't get louder. I got truer. Time softened the edges of everything, not erased them, just rounded them enough to hold. I stopped measuring days by what had been taken and started noticing what remained. Mornings, where the light hit the kitchen table just right. Evenings where silence felt like rest instead of punishment. Conversations that didn't require explanation. That's how healing announces itself. Quietly, without witnesses. Rebecca and I never had a final conversation. No dramatic reckoning, no apology shaped into something usable. We exchanged a few emails over practical matters. Neutral, polite, distant. That distance became the boundary. And boundaries, I learned too late, are a form of love, especially for yourself. The youngest son stayed close, not dependent, present. He learned how to ask without taking. The oldest stayed cautious, but consistent. I accepted both where they were. Forgiveness isn't a reset, it's a recalibration. One afternoon, months later, I opened the box Rebecca had sent me in the beginning. The one filled with fragments of my life. I didn't put everything back where it had been. Some things no longer fit the woman I'd become. I kept Thomas's watch, wore it daily. Not as a reminder of loss, as proof of endurance. I started volunteering at a local literacy center. No one knew my history. No one needed to. I liked being useful without being managed, valued without being controlled. There's a freedom in anonymity when you've spent too long being defined by others. Sometimes people still ask about my family. I answer honestly. I have one, I say. It just doesn't look the way people expect. That's the truth. And the truth doesn't owe anyone comfort. On the anniversary of the church incident, I walked past again. This time I went inside. Sat near the back, not to reclaim the space, just to exist in it without shrinking. No one announced my presence. No one needed to. I left when I was ready. That was the victory. That night, I closed the notebook for the last time. I didn't need it anymore. The words had done their work. I had done mine. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. Being erased hurts. But rebuilding yourself on your own terms, that changes everything. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I lived. And that was enough.